Hello, people. How's it going? Well, as the thumbnail states, this is lecture one on creative writing. Sorry, I have to do something real fast. Anyway, but this will be lecture one on creative writing. This will be, well, creative writing. It'll talk about books. It'll talk about writing. It'll, talk about writing. I'm making this far more complicated than I need to. What is creative writing? Well, as the thumbnail says, creative writing is making the mundane interesting. It really is. A lot of ways, a lot of creative writing is taking ordinary, mundane, routine events or moments or anything, either interesting as the major plot or as a subplot, or just as a point of interest in the story. I mean, there is really nothing really mundane if you know how to be creative about it. I mean, creative writing is about writing about people, human nature, events. I mean, even science fiction is still about people. I mean, you can't write anything really unless you write something like Watership Down or I'll just use Watership Down because those are just strictly rabbits. Very good book, by the way. Don't let your kids watch the movie because they will be traumatized. But that's creativity. It is making the mundane interesting. It is making the routine interesting. It's making ordinary everyday life worth reading about, even if it isn't, exciting. Sorry, I moved that thing. But creative writing should be able to look at an event or a moment or even just an idea, no matter how routine it may sound, how uninteresting it may sound. I mean, the core of writing is to tell a story. If you have to have an imagination. I think that's what I'm trying to lead. Imagination is required to write. Unfortunately, I can name a few authors who I find a lot of people like, and I find them boring. I'm sorry. I find nothing creative about the Handmaid's Tale. I am sorry. I have read the book. I read it a long time ago when a friend of mine from Penny's recommended I read it. She liked it. Betsy liked this book. She wanted me to read it, so I read it. It's mundane. It's boring. It's one-dimensional. It comes across as a rough draft. It comes across as the characters are either one or two-dimensional. There's nothing three-dimensional about these characters. That's what I mean by you've got to be able to make the mundane, the routine, the almost non-interesting interesting. You got to be able to create. Hence the word creative writing. But in a lot of ways, I think a lot of authors overthink their subject. They think they're trying to be more clever than creative. They're trying to be, like to stand on their soapbox instead of just tell a story or to, get across their points. What isn't creative writing is not being able to make something, almost anything interesting. If you cannot make a simple daily life interesting, you're going to bore your audience. You just are. It doesn't have to be exciting. You at least have to give the idea, the impression that this mundane thing that you're writing about is interesting to the character. If you can make it interesting to the character, you can make it interesting to the reader. At least that's the idea. Creative writing is about making simple life interesting. I mean, you read some of the books by other authors of the last centuries, and mostly last century, the last 200-300 years. Certainly the last 1800s and the 1900s. They had some very simple stories that were not, they weren't, these monstrous epics. They had routine, ordinary, normal, mundane. I like the word mundane because it almost implies like, why would you want to write about it? Well, if you're creative and you have an imagination, you can make that interesting. You can flesh it out. The problem with Handmaid's Tale, in my opinion, is these are one or two dimensional characters that are about as fleshy as paper. They're about as fleshed out as a piece of paper. My phone keeps ringing. Anyway, but the elements of creative writing. I mean, the elements of a good creative story, whether it's War and Peace by Tolstoy or something by John Steinbeck like The White Quail or The Chrysanthemums. There's one other story I was going to use, but I forgot what it was. But anyway, I mean, character development has got to be first and foremost in any story. I don't care where the story takes place. I don't care what the plot is. But if the characters are as dimensional as a piece of paper, you have no imagination and you cannot write. If your characters come across as wooden, and granted there are people out there who do come across as wooden, but if you can't make even that woodenness at least understandable, that's their character, and that's kind of just who they are, that's their personality, but somehow you manage to make it interesting. If you can't make the mundane interesting or as a character, don't try to be a creative writer because you'll fail miserably. But character has got to be the first and foremost thing you have to work on for it to be good writing, even in the mundane, even in the routine. I mean, next time I'll have better examples, but I have read stories where literally it is kind of just some routine, ordinary story of no great significance, just a daily life and something. Mostly by Steinbeck. It's the only one I can think of, but I can't remember what the title is. But I'll have to look it up and I'll tell you what the title is. But character development is the number one failing in a lot of stories I've read. These are interesting characters, kinda. They're almost interesting, even though they're only two-dimensional. You gotta have three-dimensional major characters. I don't expect the minor characters to be completely three-dimensional because they're minor. They're really not. They're not the major focal point of a story. But they've got to at least have some semblance of something about them that stands out, even if it's just a short little sentence about somebody seeing somebody else. That somebody else, you need to be able to write something about them that gives you a hint of their character, that gives a hint of their personality. It gives a hint that there's more to them than this just brief glimpse of somebody looking at them and watching them walk by. I think a lot of writing is just one-dimensional, two-dimensional. I'm sorry. I know I keep going back in A Handmaid's Tale, but to me it's the best example I can come up. The book bored me to tears. It's like, this doesn't make any sense. These characters are boring, and I didn't care about any of them. I found it very one-dimensional, maybe almost two-dimensional, maybe here and there. But the characters, I didn't care. I literally did not care about these people. They were boring. I mean, it's like trying to bore somebody with history. You have to work at it to make history boring in my mind. Just like you have to work at it to make writing boring and mundane. The plot, in the same reason. The plot can be anything. A plot can be anything, and I mean anything. But if the characters don't carry the plot because they're too one-dimensional, you failed. I'm sorry. You should just give up writing anything because you're going to bore me, and I don't like being bored. I think the third, I have my list over there, my notes over there. That's why I keep looking over there. To me, landscape is the third most important thing for most stories that I kind of write. I write stories about psychology. I'm more interested in what goes on inside the characters' heads than what's going on going outside of them. It's one of those complaints I get every once in a while from people who want more action, or they want to see more of the landscape that the characters are occupying. And I try to write as little bit as I can to give them an idea where my characters are. But a lot of my problems with novels of the 1800s is there's so much description. It literally drowns the novels into oblivion. It's partly why I can't read a lot of those novels, is they just take up so much space to describe a tree or describe just the landscape or something. It's like, just tell me in a few short little paragraphs what the character is looking at. I mean, you got to be able to describe a landscape and use less than 15,000 words to do it. I'm sorry. I don't have the patience for it. I should, but I don't. But the landscape, the scene where it's taking place, to me, that's kind of third of importance, depending on the story, really. But for the most part, character development has got to be first. If your characters are mundane and ordinary, you can make the ordinary interesting if you really try. You can make almost anything interesting. You can make watching paint dry actually interesting if you try. You have to have an imagination to do it, but you can do it. I should do that. I'm going to write a story about a person watching paint dry. That should be interesting. But it's snowing. I'm sorry, I was thinking outside the snow. It's winter. What are you gonna do? But to me, the elements of creative writing is those three things: character, plot, and landscape scene. The location of where it's taking place. But character has got to be first. You can have the most interesting, you can have the most descriptive landscape and have a great plot. Because I don't think Handmaid's Tale's plot is wrong. It's the characters. It's not the plot of the novel that's boring. It actually is interesting. Except the characters make it boring. They just do. And I know Betsy liked this book. This was almost 20 odd years ago, 15 years ago. Whenever it was. It's been a while. Whenever I was working for J.C. Penney's. But you can have the best plot in the world. Greatest plot ever written. And you can describe fantastic scenery. But if your characters are one-dimensional or non-existent, I'm not going to care. Because character drives stories. I'm sorry, it does. Even in the World War II story, the war might be the central landscape and the central plot, but the characters are going to drive the plot and drive the landscape. I'm not going to use, I probably will use The Handmaid's Tale again as an example, but I'm moving on. I've made my point, I think. Creative writing is being able to make the mundane, the routine, the ordinary, the everyday interesting. Doesn't have to be monumentally interesting. Doesn't have to be grandiose or epic making interesting. Oh, excuse me. But you should be able to make the characters at least interesting. I mean, watching paint dry is boring. But the characters watching this or painting or whatever, you have to make them interesting. They're the ones who drive the stories. Like I said, you can have the most interesting landscape all you want. You can have the most fascinating plot all you want. But if it's dull, it's dull. Okay? You can't. Dull characters will kill a story. Even if the character is supposed to be dull, you should be able to figure out a way to make them strangely interesting, despite the fact that they're dull and my hair is driving me nuts. I know I'm weird. But, writing is easy. It is easy. Writing is the easiest thing you can do until you start using words. I have that written down as a quote, by the way. Writing is easy. It's the words that are hard. And it's true. They are. Anybody can write anything. I mean, you can write a sentence, but it's the words that matter. Just like the character. You could have a great character in your head, but if you cannot write them down as being good characters, no one's going to care. I mean, simple as that. Nobody's going to care. I mean, writing should be interesting. It shouldn't be boring. And believe me, there's a lot of boring, interesting, non-interesting things out there. I mean, there are possibilities. The Handmaid's Tale's plot, as I keep saying, because I like using it as an example, isn't boring. The plot is not boring. The plot is interesting. Characters are dull. They're one-dimensional. I shouldn't say that they're dull. They're one-dimensional to me. It's written like a rough draft. Like, whoever wrote this as a rough draft and handed it in. Instead of the editor saying, this is dull, these people are one-dimensional, maybe two, maybe you're lucky, redo it. Because it is boring. I'm sorry, it is. I know people like the book. I know people love the book. I'm not one of them. I found the characters. I found them, even they're they were not interesting. I know I'm at 15 minutes now. I don't want to make it too long. I'm trying to keep these to 15. But um, that's lecture one. It'll be other stuff because I'm going to try to make this, as I keep saying, I'm going to keep trying to do these things. I do have a book recommendation. Actually, I have two because they're a series. So these two books are excellent books on the subject of writing short stories. I've read both of them. Very good. I read that one a long time ago. This is a new one I found. But the Writer's Digest, Handbook of Short Story Writing, excellent books. Worth buying if you can find it on Amazon and/or thrift books. Probably thrift books, but I think I got those on thrift books. It was either Amazon or thrift books. I don't remember. But see my writing right. That's why I wore it. But I'm going to close. Hopefully, I will have lecture 2 next Sunday. It'll probably be still on the same. Well, it'll be on the same subjects as creative writing, but hopefully, I'll be a little bit more organized. Hopefully. Well, people, you behave yourselves. Subscribe, please. Ask questions. Send me questions. Make comments. Stay out of trouble, people, because I'm not going to. Later. Have a good day.